ask was, is that why there were Greek-speaking Jews in that time also? Yes, that is one of the main reasons after Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire in 332 BC. Koine Greek became a common language throughout the Eastern Mediterranean, even after Rome took control. It says Greek remained the everyday language in many areas. Many Jews therefore speak it says Hebrew for the scriptures and temple, Aramaic common spoken language in much of Judea, and Greek, which is Koine, for trade, government, and education and communication across the empire. And of course, for those who despise and dislike the Jews, which are Jews that will dislike themselves, and want to fit in with the Greek, what would they have done? They have completely removed themselves from the Lashon Kodash, the holy tongue, and completely adopted the Greek culture, customs, and languages, which we does have in the Maccabees. And so now we're going to connect now the Maccabees also into the New Testaments after. Hold on. Watch this. This is the book of Maccabees. Let me grab it real quick. Fashioned. I believe it's with perfect read. Let's go from 1 coming down. Alright. Yeah, we'll go from 1 coming down. Right? Just get straight to the point. It says and this is actually according to what we read before in the information there, with a little bit more description. So you can understand now how many of our people would become Greeks, become Gentile or a Gentilic state of mind. It goes back into the law in Leviticus 18 verse 30, 29 and verse 30. For those who keep the customs of the heathen nations, is going to be cut off from among their people. They're going to be removed from them, whether it be mindset, whether it be unalived, or whether it be from the land. And as you can see, many people was removed from the land, removed from the ways of Yahweh Shemeshah, and becoming a dark state of mind, and also many were unalived. That's why it's good to go into your words. It gives you the definition regardless. So let's read. It says this Simon now, it says, of whom we spake afore, having been a betrayer of the money and of his country, slandered Onias as if he had terrified Helidorus and been the worker of these evils. Thus was he bold to call him a traitor, that he had deserved well of the city and tendered his own nation, and was so zealous of the laws. But when their hatred went so far that by one of Simon's factions murders were committed, Onias, seeing the danger of this content, and the Apollonius, as being the governor of Celesyria and Phoenice, did rage and increase Simon's malice. Here it says, but like the point is coming down. As you go down from Jason, it gives you the vague understanding what you need to know as to why our people were speaking Greek at that time, because we had to adapt ourselves according to the Greek fashion and the ways of the Greek, which also include the language that they spoke, right? It says, he went to the king, not to be an accuser of the countryman, but seeking the good of all, both public and private, for he saw that it was impossible that the state should continue quiet, and Simon leave his folly, unless the king did took thereunto. But after the death of Seleucus, when Antiochus called Epiphanes took the kingdom, Jason, the brother of Onias, labored underhand to be high priest, promising unto the king by intercessions 300 and threescore talents of silver, and of another revenue 80 talents.
Beside this, he promised to assign.
No man. Right. Beside this, he promised to assign 150 more, if he might have license to set him up a place for exercise and for training up the youth in the fashions of the heathen. So, in other words, the youth that is grown up now, that is going to grow up, would only understand the ways of the heathens, of the Grecian Empire. They would not understand or know the ways of the Jews or the ways of the Israelites. They would now be taken up into what? Greekish culture and fashion. So in that part, coming down to now, what is the only thing they would have known? Greek ways, transitions into Roman, Greek and Roman ways. That's all they would have known. Which is why we have let us take what? Let me continue. It will show itself. This is, and to write them of Jerusalem by the name of Antiochus, which when the king had granted, and he had gotten into his hand the rule, he forthwith brought his own nation to Greekish fashion. What he did? He brought his own nation, which is the nation of Israel. In that time, the Jews, the southern kingdom, basically Judah, Benjamin, and Levi. What did he do? He brought this nation to Greekish fashions. So we want to understand why they were Greek-speaking Jews. It's because of Hellenization during the time of Greek Empire under Antiochus, surnamed Epiphanes. Let's keep going. And again, just pay attention to the youths, what have taken place and everything. It says, and the royal privileges granted of special favors to the Jews by the means of John, the father of Eupolemus, who went ambassador to Rome for amity and aid. He took away and putting down the governments which were according to the law, he brought up new customs against the law. What did he do? Brought up new customs against the law. Let's keep going. There's more. It says, for he built gladly a place of exercise under the tower itself, and brought the chief young men under his subjection, and made them wear hats. Which is why we can tell you, before that situation, hats that covers the top of the head, especially during times of worship, would have not been a custom of Israel. It's actually in your law. Let's continue. Now such was the height of Greek fashions and increase of heathenish manners, through the exceeding profaneness of Jason, that ungodly wretch, and no high priest. It says that the priest had no courage to serve any more at the altar, but despising the temple and neglecting the sacrifices, hastened to be partakers of the unlawful allowance in the place of exercise. And again, for those who did not understand what would be taking place in the place of exercise at that time, would have been nudity in sports, and even homosexuality. See that this is something that was practiced in the Greek in time of Greeks. When you look at the statutes, you're seeing men and men as they pose together, and you're seeing the rods in the front, which was literally created as a statue for those here now to see. These are things that are not hidden. It's shown as part of Greek culture and ways and fashion. So let's continue. After the game of discourse, called them forth. It says, not setting by the honors of their fathers, but liking the glory of the Grecians best of all, by reason whereof sore calamity came upon them, for they had them to be their enemies and avengers, whose customs they followed so earnestly, and unto whom they desired to be like in all things. So who did they desire to be like? The Greeks, which is also mentioned in the history to read. Undergoing painful cosmetic surgeries to appear to look like these people. They became literal Gentiles. They became literal Greeks in appearance also. It's right there. The information is there. The information is in the history, historical accuracy, biblical standpoints, in the prophecies, which is foretold to come. So to see these people now coming and saying, there's no Jews and Greeks, and is referring to the other. No, you're wrong. You're very much wrong. Yeah, do you remember Paul's writings was for the what? The lost Jakes, and they became Greeks, and they became Gentiles, and the process of reconciliation. What's reconciliation? Re-establishing a friendly relation. You can't re-establish a friendly relation with an entity or a being that he was never praising. Which counts out all these heathens. Let's continue. Yeah, we will get there. For it is not a light thing to do wickedly against the laws of God, but the time following shall desire these things. So you see? So as we read of what Jason would have done and successfully completed, changing the entire identity of our people in that time that wasn't fighting against that, or those who were disobedient, which is majority of our people at that time, adhere, accepted, and fully engaged in the customs of the Grecian Empire, or the Greeks, or as they call heathenish ways, and rejecting the full ways of Yahweh Bahasham Yahweh Shai. And there are many who kept the ways and were martyred for such actions. Because as we know, the king's decree is those who would partake of the laws, or who would not partake of the king's laws, should die, should be put to death, as we read in the first part, 1 Maccabees chapter 1 and verse 50. Let's make sure and see and complete that immediately again, because we don't want no talk after that. It has to be well understood. So if you had to go back a few times, then we'll do so. It says again, we read, like straight to the point. It says, to the end that they might forget the law and change all the ordinances, which we see many of them would have done. They have changed the laws into what? The ordinances into what they believe as their new way, which is the Grecian way, and forgot the laws and partake of the laws of the king in the land. And whosoever would not do according to the commandment of the king, he said he should die. And we had many examples of that, like the 7 Hebrew boys with the mother, along with the elder and a few others that were unalive for the sake of keeping the ways of Yahweh Shem Roshai, but they remained diligent and sincere, knowing that they would come again to continue their work, which of course we know they did through the process of what? Regeneration, reincarnation, regeneration, to be exact. Let's stay tuned until the next lesson. Shalom.